following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
My baby dolls, we are back again with another episode of Genesis. As always, I am your host, Ian Kahanowitz, and today I'm here to do something kind of new with you folks. I don't have a guest on, and what I'd like to do, as suggested by our fearless leader, Ralph Zigzag Man Tycho, is for me to talk a little bit about subjects, baseball, movies, stories of the day. But with the winter meetings coming up and the baseball trades and hot stills alive and well, today I'd like to speak about old-time baseball player Tris Speaker. And the reason why I want to speak about him is because in history, Mr. Speaker has been forgotten tremendously over the years. The books really didn't come out about him until 2006, and there was very little talk about Mr. Speaker due to the fact he played in an era with Ty Cobb, and Cobb overshadowed Speaker's career. But when a guy hits 345 of all time, and probably in the dead ball era and well into the live ball era, had the best glove out of any center fielder, some sort of spoken word needs to be said about Tris Speaker. First of all, Tristan Edgar Speaker was called the Gray Eagle. That's because he grayed early. He was an American baseball player, and as I mentioned, he was considered one of the best offensemen and defensive center fielders in the history of Major League Baseball. He compiled a career batting average of 345. He's sixth all time. His 792 career doubles represents a Major League Baseball career record. His 3,514 hits are fifth in the all-time hits list. Defensively, Speaker holds career records for assists, double plays, and unassisted double plays by an outfielder. His fielding glove is known as the place, and I quote, where triples go to die. Now, after playing in the minor leagues in Texas and Arkansas, he was born in the South in Texas, Speaker debuted with the Boston Red Sox in 1907. He became the regular center fielder by 1909 and led the Red Sox to World Series championships in 1912 and 1915. In 1915, Speaker's batting average dropped to 322 from 338 the previous season, and he was traded to the Cleveland Indians, where he refused to take a pay cut. As a player-manager for Cleveland later on, he led the team to its first World Series title in 1920. In 10 of his 11 seasons with Cleveland, he finished with a batting average greater than 350. Speaker resigned as Cleveland's manager in 1926 after he and Ty Cobb faced game-fixing allegations. Both men were later cleared by Judge Landis. Of course, many of you folks know my book on the subject will be coming out this spring. It's more in-depth than just a scandal happening. There's a whole big thing that goes along with it, but that's why both Speaker and Cobb did not return to Detroit and Cleveland. Speaker went to Philadelphia to join Connie Mack. Speaker went to Washington, but a year later, Connie Mack picked him up and paired him with Ty Cobb. Now, during his managerial stint in Cleveland, Speaker introduced the platoon system in the major leagues, and that's very important. He was one of the first managers to take people in or out, use a righty-lefty batter against a righty-lefty pitcher, and he thought about what he did as a manager, almost John McGraw or Connie Mack, one of the better of the two managers in early baseball. Now, in his early life, Speaker was born on April 4th, 1888. Now, if you don't know what April 4th is in history, Many of us in the 20th century remember that as the day Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. So he was born on a famous day in Hubbard, Texas, to Archie and Nancy Power Speaker. As a young kid, Speaker broke his arm after he fell from a horse. The injury forced him to become left-handed. Very interesting, because in those days, medical science isn't what it is today, and of course sometimes permanent damage to a body part was normal. In 1905, Speaker played a year of college baseball at Fort Worth Polytechnic Institute. Newspaper reports have held that Speaker suffered a football injury and nearly had his arm amputated around this time. Biographer Timothy Gray, who wrote the definitive biography, characterizes this as a story that the macho Speaker never dispelled. He worked on a ranch before beginning his professional baseball career. Now, Speaker's abilities drew the interest of Doak Roberts, the owner of the Selborne Railroaders of the Texas League. In 1906, after losing several games as a pitcher, Speaker converted to an outfielder to replace a Claiborne player who had been struck in the head with a pitch. That year, he batted .318 for the Railroaders. Speaker's mother opposed his participation in the major league, saying that they reminded her of slavery due to the fact that baseball players were working for a pittance and injuries occurred, and there was really no rights that baseball players had. They didn't have the union until 60 years later, until Marvin Miller came in. But though she felt this way, his mother relented, and for several years, Mrs. Speaker questioned why her son had not stayed home and entered the cattle for business, or oil business, because they were down in Texas, and one of the two ways to make ends meet or become wealthy was to deal with cattle or oil. Now, he performed well for his Texas leagues, and then he went up to what was called the Houston Buffaloes in 1907, but his mother stated she would never allow him to go to the Boston Americans when he was sold to the Americans for $750, which again today would be about $20,000. Now, he started with Boston in 1907, played 7 games. He had 3 hits and 19 at-bats for a 158 average. In 1908, Boston Americans owner John Taylor changed the team's name to the Red Sox after the bright Sox the team's uniform had. That year, the club traded Speaker to the Little Rock Travelers of the Southern League in exchange for use of their facilities for spring training. Speaker batted .350 for the Travelers, and his contract was repurchased by the Red Sox. He logged a .224 batting average in 116 at-bats that year. Now, Speaker became the starting center fielder for Boston in 1909, and light-hitting Denny Sullivan was sold to the Cleveland Naps. Speaker hit .309 in 143 games as the team finished third in the pennant race. Defensively, Speaker was involved in 12 double plays, leading the league's outfielders, and had a .973 fielding percentage, third amongst outfielders. In 1910, the Red Sox signed left fielder Duffy Lewis. Speaker, Lewis, and Harry Hooper formed Boston's $1 million outfield, one of the finest outfield trios in baseball history. Speaker was the star of $1 million outfield. He ran fast enough that he could stand very close to second base, effectively giving the team a fifth infielder. But he still caught balls hit to center field. Now, keep in mind, we're playing with the dead ball era. And so the dead ball didn't really carry that far to a wall, very rarely. But even so, when balls were hit into the outfield, Tris Speaker got on his horse and was able to snag the ball. Now, in 1910 and 1911, Boston finished 4th in the American League. But by 1912, Speaker's best season came out. He played every game, led the American League in doubles with 53, home runs with 10. He set career highs with 222 hits, 136 runs, and 580 at-bats, along with 52 stolen bases. Speaker's stolen bases tally was a team record until Tommy Hopper stole 54 bases in 1973. Speaker batted .383, and his .567 slugging percentage was the highest of his dead ball days. Speaker set a Major League single record with 3 hitting streaks of 20 or more games. He also became the first Major Leaguer to hit 50 doubles, steal 50 bases in the same season. In August, Speaker's mother unsuccessfully attempted to convince him to quit baseball and come home. In Fenway Park's first game, Speaker drove in the winning run in the 11th inning, giving Boston a 7-6 win. Now, in 1912, besides the institution of Fenway Park, the Red Sox won the AL pennant, finishing 14 games ahead of the Washington Senators and 15 games ahead of the Philadelphia A's. In the World Series that year, Speaker led the Red Sox to their second World Series title by defeating John McGraw's New York Giants. After the second game was called on account of darkness, because in those years, you didn't have lights in ballparks, and so no one could see the ball, and that game ended in a tie. The series went to 8 games. The Red Sox won the final game after Fred Snodgrass dropped an easy fly ball and later failed to go after a Speaker pop foul. After the pop foul, Speaker tied the game with a single. The Red Sox won the game in the bottom of the 10th. He finished the series with a .300 batting average, 9 hits, 4 runs scored. Speaker was named the most valuable player for the American League in 1912. Though he did not lead the league in any offensive categories in 1913, Speaker finished 4th in AL MVP voting. Now, Speaker batted .338 and tied his career high of 12 double plays as an outfielder in 1914. However, next year, he hit .322 in 1915, and the Red Sox did beat the Philadelphia Phillies in the 1915 World Series, and of course, a young pitcher named Babe Ruth was playing his full season. Ruth won 18 games and hit a career high team high of hitting 4 home runs. Speaker got 5 hits, including a triple, in 17 at-bats during the series. He scored twice, but did not drive in any runs. After 1915, Red Sox president Joseph Lannon wanted Speaker to take a pay cut from about $15,000 to about $9,000 because the drop in his batting average. Now, in those days, you didn't have free agency, folks. The owners could look at you upside down, sideways, and say, well, you know what? You didn't really have as good a year as last year. We're going to dock you. And there was no unions who could fight for you. You were under what was called the reserve clause. And the reserve clause basically states this. Every year you have a right to re-sign with your team a contract for another 1 year. If you don't sign the contract, you must sit out for the year, and only then after you sit out, the club has a right to renew your contract the next year and pick you up. So Speaker, he got mad. He refused and offered $12,000. And on April 8th, 1916, the Sox traded Speaker to the Cleveland Indians. In exchange, Boston received Sad Sam Jones, Fred Thomas, and $50,000. Now, I just want to point out one thing. The reason why 1915 is very important was because at the time from 1913 to 1915, a rival league was scooping up very good Major League Baseball players, the Federal League, and they were paying them very high salaries, at least higher than what Major League Baseball was playing. So in order to compete, the owners, lifted the salaries of most players. Now, when the league folded in 1915, Major League Baseball had a monopoly. And again, now there's no one there to jump to. There's no competing salaries, so the owners could do whatever they wanted to do. Now, Speaker held out that year. And what happened was he received $10,000 of that cash that Boston collected for the trade. Now, with an annual salary of $40,000 the Indians gave him, Speaker was the highest paid player in baseball. He hit over 350 in 9 of his 11 years with Cleveland. In 1916, he led the league in hits, doubles, batting average, slugging percentage, and on-base percentage. Cobb had won the previous 9 consecutive American League batting titles. Speaker out-hit him with a 386 batting average compared to Cobb's 371 in 1916. The center field fence at Cleveland's Dunfield was 460 feet from home plate until it was shortened to 420 in 1920. Now that's, even in today's standard, 460 feet is a heck of a long way to reach, especially with a ball that doesn't go by. Even so, Speaker played so shallow in the outfield that he was able to execute 6 career unassisted double plays at second base, catching low line drives that the run and beating base runners to the bag because he was swift. At least once he was credited as the pivot man in a routine double play. He was often shallow enough to catch a pickoff throw at second base. At one point, Speaker's signature move was to come in behind second base on a bunt and make a tag play on a base runner who had passed the bag. While in Cleveland, Speaker participated in diverse activities off the baseball field. He enrolled in the aviator training program in 1918, and through World War I though World War I ended less than 2 months after he enrolled, Speaker completed his training and served in the Naval Reserves for several years. He also owned a ranch in Texas and competed in roping events during the baseball off-seasons. Rodeo. Now, from that day, Speaker arrived in Cleveland. Manager Lee Fole rarely made an important move without consulting Speaker. So again, although not a manager or an assistant manager, his experience was immeasurable to Cleveland. Now, George Huell recalled from an incident from a 1919 game during his rookie year with the Indians. Speaker often signaled to Fole when he thought a pitcher should be brought in from the bullpen. One day, Fole missed Speaker's signal and brought in a different pitcher than Speaker had intended. To avoid the appearance of overruling his manager, Speaker let the change stand. Pitcher Fritz Combe lost the game. Fole resigned that night, and Speaker became default manager. Huell said that Speaker felt bad for contributing to Fole's departure. But here's where it gets good, folks. Speaker guided the 1920 Indians to their first World Series win. In a crucial late-season game against the second-place White Sox, Speaker caught a hard-line drive hit to deep right center field by shoeless Joe Jackson, who was not banned yet from baseball, although the 1919 World Series was played a year earlier. They were not banned until after the 1920 season, when Commissioner Landis became the first commissioner of baseball. Now, on a dead run, Speaker leaped with both feet off the ground, snaring the ball before crashing into the concrete wall. As he lay unconscious from the impact, Speaker still held the baseball. In the 1920 World Series against Brooklyn, Speaker hit an RBI triple in the deciding game, which the Indians won 3-0. Cleveland's 1920 season was also significant due to the death of Ray Chapman on August 17th. Chapman died after being hit in the head by a pitch from pitcher Carl Mays. Chapman had been asked about retirement before the season and said he wanted to help Speaker earn Cleveland's first World Series victory before thinking of retirement. Now, With heavy hearts, they did go on to win the championship that year. Speaker is credited, as I mentioned before, the platoon system. Very important. Now, the next year, 1921, the Indians remained in a tight pennant race all year, finishing 4.5 games behind the Yanks. The Indians did not seriously contend for the pennants. From 22 through 25, Speaker led the league in doubles 8 times, including every year from 1920 and 23. He led the league's outfielders in fielding percentages in 1921, in 1922, and on May 17th, 1925, Speaker became the 5th member of the 3,000 Club when he hit a single off a pitcher Tom Zachary of the Washington Senators. Only Napoleon LaJoie had previously accomplished the feat as a member of the Indians. Now, here's the scandal. What happened was Van Johnson asked Speaker and Detroit manager Ty Cobb to resign their posts after a scandal broke in the offseason in 1926. Pitcher Dutch Leonard, who played with both Speaker and Cobb, claimed that Cobb and Speaker fixed at least one game between the Indians and Detroit back in 1919. In a newspaper column published shortly before the hearings were to begin, Billy Evans, who was a former Major League player and an umpire, characterized the accusations as purely a matter of personal revenge for Leonard, who was pretty much let go by Cobb in 1926 and picked up by no one, but he felt by playing with both Cobb and Speaker might have picked him up, considering Leonard was a good pitcher, although he was very difficult to get along with, and really no one wanted that attitude on any team. Leonard claimed this was a conspiracy among Speaker and Cobb, that no other team picked him up, and so he decided to rat both these guys out about a game that took place late in September 1919, the same year as the White Sox threw the World Series. There was a trial between both Cobb and Speaker. Joe Wood, Smokey Joe, was also involved. Testimony was heard, and eventually both players were cleared of their name. Now, after the season, like I mentioned, Speaker went to play with Washington. Cobb joined the A's, and Speaker joined Cobb in Philadelphia for the 28 season. As the A's were becoming a powerhouse again, rebuilding, now they had probably two of the greatest hitters of the dead ball era on the team. And although he finished with a .267 average, he still was able to contribute to a rising athletics team. Now, Speaker's Major League playing career ended after 1928. He retired with 792 doubles, an all-time career record. Defensively, Speaker holds the all-time career records for assists and double plays as an outfielder. Now, in 1929, Speaker replaced venerable pitcher Walter Johnson as the manager of the Newark Bears of the International League. In 2 seasons with Newark, he also appeared as a player in 59 games. When Speaker resigned during his second season, the Bears were in 7th place after a 6th-place finish in 1929. In 1933, he became part owner and manager of the Kansas City Blues. By May, Speaker had been replaced as manager, but remained secretary of the club. By 1936, he sold his share of the team. And by 1937, Speaker was voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame during its 2nd year of balloting. He was honored at the Hall's first induction ceremony in 1939. After his playing and manager days, Speaker was an entrepreneur and salesperson. By 1937, Speaker had opened a wholesale liquor business and worked as a state sales rep for a steel company. He chaired Cleveland's boxing commission between 1936 and 1943. Newspaper coverage credited Speaker with several key reforms to boxing in Cleveland, including the recruitment of new officials and protections against fight fixing. Under Speaker, fight payouts went directly to boxers rather than managers. Speaker sorted out a scheduling conflict for a 1940 boxing match in Cleveland involving former middleweight champion Teddy Yarrows. Yarrows defeated Jimmy Reeves in 10 rounds, and the fight attracted over 8,300 spectators. In 1937, Speaker sustained a 16-foot fall while working on a flower box near a second-story window at his home. Upon admission to the hospital, he underwent facial surgery. He was described as having better than an even chance to live and was suffering from a skull fracture, a broken arm, and possible internal injuries. He ultimately recovered. In 1939, Speaker was president of the National Professional Indoor Baseball League. The league had teams in New York, Brooklyn, Philly, Boston, Cleveland, Chicago, Cincy, and St. Louis. The league shut down operations due to poor attendance only 2 months after its formation. Speaker was one of the founders of Cleveland Society for Crippled Children, and he helped promote the society's rehab center, Camp Cheerful. Speaker served as vice president to the society, ran fundraising campaigns, and received a Distinguished Service Award from the organization. He became seriously ill with pneumonia in 1942, but ultimately recovered. But Gay characterized Speaker's condition as touch and go for several days. In 1947, Speaker returned to baseball as ambassador of goodwill for Bill Veeck and the Cleveland Indians. He remained in an advisory, coaching, and scouting roles for the Indians until his death in 1958. In an article in the July 1952 issue of Sport magazine, Speaker recounted how Veeck hired him in 1947 to be a coaching consultant to Larry Doby, the first black player in the American League. He came to the American League 3 weeks after Jackie Robinson signed with the National League and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Before the Indians had signed Doby, he was the star second baseman of the Newark Eagles of the Negro Leagues. A sport photograph that accompanied the article shows Speaker mentoring 5 members of the Indians: Luke Easter, Jim Hagan, Ray Boone, Al Rosen, and, of course, Larry Doby. Speaker was inducted to the Texas Sports Hall of Fame in 1951. Texas was the first state to establish a state sports Hall of Fame, and Speaker was his inaugural induction class. Speaker died of a heart attack on December 8, 1958, at the age of 70 at Lake Whitney, Texas. He collapsed as he and a friend were pulling their boat into the dock after a fishing trip. It was his second heart attack in 4 years. Speaker was buried at Fairview Cemetery in Hubbard, Texas. After Speaker's death, Cobb said, terribly depressed, I never let him know how much I admired him when we were playing against each other. It was only after we finally became teammates and then retired that I could tell Tris Speaker of the underlying respect I had for him. LaJoey said, he was one of the greatest fellows I ever knew, both as a baseball player and as a gentleman. Former Boston teammate Duffy Lewis said he was a team player. As a great hitter as he wasn't looking out for his own average. Speaker was the bell cow of our outfield. Harry Hooper and I watch him and know how to play the hitters. Now, immediately after Speaker's death, the baseball field at the City Park in Claiborne, Texas, was renamed in honor of Speaker. In 1961, the Tris Speaker Memorial Award was created by the Baseball Writers Association of America to honor players or officials who make outstanding contributions to baseball. In 1999, he ranked 27th on the Sporting News list of the 100 greatest players to play Major League Baseball. He was named to the Major League Baseball All-American Century Team. Speaker is mentioned in the poem Line Up for Yesterday by Ogden Nash. And as you could see, Tris Speaker was a great person, great baseball player, and should be remembered for not only his batting prowess, but is also for patrolling center field. With that, I'm Ian Kahanowitz. I hope you enjoyed my solo segment on Trispika, and in the words of my hero, Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.